It was an unusually chilly fall evening in Janesville. I was sitting in my office leafing through an old photo album when the phone rang. It was almost 8 o'clock, and I wasn't expecting a call at this hour. "Oscar Barlow here," I said, holding the receiver to my ear. "Uncle Oscar, it's Jonah. I'm sorry for calling so late, but I thought you should know." Her niece sounded unsure, which was unusual for her. Iona Reeves, daughter of my late brother Timothy, was always determined and direct. "What's wrong?" I asked, closing the album. "Is it something with your mother?" "No, Mom's fine. It's Pearl. She's getting married." I was quiet for a few seconds, letting the news settle in my head. "Pearl is my only daughter, 32 years old, with whom we have an uneasy relationship to say the least. And she certainly didn't see fit to tell me herself," I said finally, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I thought you knew." Iona's voice softened. "She sent out the advance notices a week ago. The wedding's in 2 months." "Who is she marrying?" I asked, getting up from the table and walking to the window. A light rain drizzled outside the window, turning the street into a blurry watercolor. "To Gordon Pitt. He's an insurance broker, works at First National. They've been dating for about a year." I snorted. Even the name sounded pretentious. Probably just another narcissist with a perfect smile and an empty head. "What do you know about him?" I walked back to the table and sat on the edge. 36 years old, divorced, no kids. Successful, if the office rumors are to be believed. Specializes in life insurance for wealthy clients. "But," I caught a slight hitch in her voice, "but he's—" Iona was struggling for words. "He's arrogant, and he likes to impress. I met him at a corporate event. Our companies work together. He's the kind of guy who laughs out loud at his own jokes and calls waiters buddy." I mentally drew a picture of him. Expensive suit, perfect haircut, condescending smile. A perfect match for Pearl, who was always going for flash and status. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, feeling a muffled irritation building up inside, not at Jonah, of course, but at the situation. At least now I'd be ready when I got the official invitation, if I do. "Uncle Oscar," Jonah's voice became pleading. "Maybe I should call her myself. I know you two have a complicated relationship, but—" "No," I interrupted her gently but firmly. "If Pearl wants me at her wedding, she'll find a way to let me know." After the call, I sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the photograph on my desk. Elizabeth, my late wife, was looking at me with an unchanging soft smile. 3 years had passed since her passing, and the pain of loss still felt physical, as if someone had ripped out a part of me and the wound would not heal. "What would you say, Liz?" I whispered, running my finger along the frame. "What would you advise? Me, Oscar Barlow, 66, former economics teacher, widower, father, and, in my daughter's opinion, an inconvenient relative. Someone who doesn't fit into her idea of an ideal life with his unpresentable appearance, old-fashioned looks, and habit of saying what I think." Elizabeth and I met in graduate school. She was an English literature major. I was an economics major. We married in our 3rd year, much to the dismay of her parents, who thought their daughter deserved someone more promising. But we were happy. Pearl was born 2 years after the wedding. We both worked at Janesville College, living modestly but decently. I was always frugal, invested wisely, and by the time we retired, we had a substantial fortune, not wealth, but enough not to worry about the future. Elizabeth often said that Pearl was a copy of her grandmother on her mother's side. The same practicality bordering on calculating, the same desire for outward wealth and status. We loved our daughter, but there was always an invisible wall of misunderstanding between us. Elizabeth managed to maintain at least the appearance of a warm relationship. I, too straightforward, too principled, often conflicted with Pearl. When Pearl was in college, she began to feel ashamed of us, professors with wrong views of success and modest lifestyles. She reached out to the children of wealthy parents, emulated them, tried to be her own in their circle. After college, she went into real estate and succeeded pretty quickly. She started earning more than us and never missed a chance to hint at it. 3 years ago, Elizabeth passed away, quickly, from an aneurysm. We had breakfast together in the morning, discussing plans for the summer, and in the evening I was a widower. Pearl came to the funeral, stayed for a week, helped with the formalities, and disappeared from my life, appearing only on holidays or when she needed financial help. Our last meeting at Christmas ended in a quarrel. Pearl reproached me for living in the past, for refusing to move on after Elizabeth's death. By moving on, she meant selling the house, moving to a smaller apartment or nursing home, and handing over control of my finances to her so that she wouldn't bother me with such complications. I refused. She called twice since then, on some formal occasion. I stood up and walked over to the bookcase that held dozens of photo albums. Elizabeth was sentimental and documented every moment of our lives. I pulled one out at random and opened it. Pearl at 5, curly-haired, smiling, sitting on my shoulders on a trip to the zoo. At 12, serious, with straight hair, even then with that characteristic expression of slight superiority. Her college graduation, she stands between Elizabeth and me, but as if separate from us, already gone in her own life. When did this rift begin? I closed the album, unable to find an answer, and returned it to the shelf. Maybe when she went to private school, where we had struggled to get her into, denying ourselves many things, or in college, when she began to feel ashamed of our humble status as teachers, or later, when she decided that her financial success gave her the right to look down on us? I walked over to the bar and poured myself some whiskey. Elizabeth didn't approve of late-night drinking, but she was gone, and I was too old to deny myself small pleasures. The doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock, almost 10 o'clock at night. Who could it be? I opened the door and saw a messenger with an envelope. "Mr. Barlow, express delivery for you." At this hour? I was surprised, but I took the envelope and signed for it. Heavy cream paper, my name in calligraphy. Inside was an invitation to the wedding of Pearl Barlow and Gordon Pitt, to be held in 2 months at the Green Valley Country Club. The invitation is formal, impersonal. At the bottom is a handwritten note. "Father, we need to meet and discuss details. 7 o'clock tomorrow evening, Laurel's Restaurant on Highland Avenue. Pearl." No, please, no, nice to see you. Just a notice, like a business meeting. I put the invitation on the hall table and went back to my whiskey. The next morning I woke up feeling heavy. Sleep was restless, with scraps of memories and strange images. Elizabeth often dreamed of me, but today her image was particularly vivid. She was sitting in our garden among her favorite hydrangeas, saying something important, but I couldn't make out the words. I got up, took a shower, and went down to the kitchen. My house, a 2-story Victorian mansion with an attic and a small garden, was one of the few historic buildings still standing in Janesville. Elizabeth and I bought it 30 years ago when I got tenure as a professor. Now it was too big a space for one person, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Every corner here reminded me of her. I brewed some coffee, pulled out yesterday's baguette, and sat down at the table. Outside the window it was gray and rainy, typical fall weather for our town. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Jonah's number. "Good morning, Uncle Oscar." Her voice sounded cheerful despite the early hour. "How are you?" "Got an invitation last night," I said, wasting no time in greetings. "Pearl wants to meet me at the Laurels tonight." "Oh," Jonah sounded surprised. "This is unexpected. The Laurels isn't the cheapest place in town." "Exactly," I sipped my coffee. "I think it's going to be about money." "Are you going to go?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, send a quick text and say I was busy. But the other part, the part that still remembered Pearl as a child sitting on my shoulders, couldn't do that. "I'll go," I finally answered. "She is my daughter after all." Be prepared for them to ask for money, Iona warned. Pearl had told Melanie from our office that she wanted a wedding as big as the mayor's daughter's last summer, and that one cost a fortune. I can guess, I said, feeling the irritation building inside. But we'll see what she says. After my talk with Jonah, I spent the day doing the usual things. I read the paper, checked my investment portfolio, did a little work in the garden, even though the weather was not favorable for it. Despite my retirement age, I tried to keep fit. Daily walks, working in the garden, sometimes swimming in the city pool. Elizabeth always said that a man should age with dignity, keeping his strength and clarity of mind. In the evening, I began to pack for the meeting. Laurel's was a pretentious restaurant with French cuisine and exorbitant prices, not the kind of place I usually go to, but tonight I decided to match it. I pulled the suit I'd worn to Elizabeth's funeral out of the closet, ironed my shirt, and picked out a matching tie. Looking in the mirror, I saw a tall, thin man with a straight back, gray hair, and a face that Elizabeth called professorial, with deep wrinkles around his eyes and mouth, evidence of a life of reflection and worry. Iona was right. It would be about money. I knew that for sure. Ever since Elizabeth's passing, my relationship with my daughter had revolved around finances in one way or another. She never asked directly, but she was always able to create a situation where I offered to help. A new car, a down payment on an apartment, a vacation in the Bahamas. Pearl got all of these things with my help, and each time I hoped it would strengthen our relationship. And every time, I was wrong. Elizabeth saw this, but always defended her daughter. "She's young, Oscar. She's still learning about life. Give her time," she would say. But time passed, and Pearl never changed. And now that Elizabeth was gone, the relationship grew even colder. Without her softening influence, without her diplomacy, Pearl and I just couldn't find common ground. I left the house at 6:30 sharp. The rain had stopped, but the streets were wet, reflecting the light of the street lamps. As I got into my old but reliable Volvo, I thought about the fact that today's meeting was unlikely to change anything in our relationship. But maybe it's time to stop hoping for change and accept reality as it is. Maybe it's time to put an end to this painful chapter of my life. The Laurel's restaurant was located in a restored historic building in downtown Janesville. Once the town manager's mansion, it was now a place where the local elite showed off their wealth over a glass of French wine. I pulled in at 7 sharp and left my car in the parking lot. The maitre d' met me at the entrance and gave me an appraising look. My suit, though of good quality, was not up to the standard of the place, but it was decent. "I'm here to see Miss Barlow," I said, holding his gaze. "Certainly, sir. They're already waiting for you." They. So Pearl wouldn't be alone. I took a deep breath and followed the maitre d' into the back of the restaurant, past tables with expensive dishes and muffled conversations. There were 2 people sitting at a table by the window, Pearl and a man I was seeing for the first time, apparently Gordon Pitt. Pearl looked as impeccable as ever, stylish hair, perfect makeup, expensive dress. She had inherited Elizabeth's beauty, the same high cheekbones, the same expressive eyes, but there was no maternal softness in her features. Gordon was exactly as I'd imagined him to be, groomed, self-assured, with a perfect smile and a keen eye. "Father." Pearl stood up and kissed my cheek. I touched her cheek, smelling the light scent of expensive perfume. "I'd like you to meet Gordon." "Mr. Barlow." Gordon stood up and extended his hand. His handshake was firm and dry. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Pearl's told me so much about you." I hesitated but nodded and sat down at the table. The waiter immediately materialized beside me, offering a menu. "I've already ordered aperitifs for us," Pearl said, and indeed in a moment glasses of something sparkling appeared before us. "So," I decided not to waste time on small talk, "you're getting married. Congratulations." "Thank you," Pearl smiled, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. "Gordon and I are very happy." And very busy getting ready, Gordon added, putting his hand on Pearl's shoulder. The wedding of the century, you know. I'm sure it is, I sipped from my glass. The champagne was good, but too sweet for my taste. How many guests are you planning? About 200, Pearl said. Just the closest ones. I almost choked. 200 immediate family. I barely have 20 people I can call friends. Impressive, I said in a neutral tone. And where would it take place? At the Green Valley Country Club. Pearl's voice was dreamy. They have a fabulous banquet hall and gorgeous grounds for the photo shoot. And of course, the prices are terrific, I added. Gordon laughed, but it sounded fake. Well, Mr. Barlow, you have to pay for quality these days. That's what we wanted to talk about, Father. Pearl leaned across the table toward me. Do you remember that you promised to pay for my wedding? I frowned, trying to remember when I'd made that promise. When I was 16, Pearl continued, seeing my confusion, you said you'd put money aside for my wedding so I could marry like a princess. I vaguely recalled that conversation. Pearl was a teenager who had just watched some romantic movie and dreamed of a lavish wedding. I had probably said something comforting that fathers say to their teenage daughters. That was a long time ago, Pearl, I answered cautiously. And I'm not sure that's what I promised. But you wouldn't refuse to help your only daughter on such an important day, would you? There was a pleading tone in her voice that I knew well. Pearl had always had a way of manipulating me, playing on my father's feelings. I'm not saying I won't help. I looked her straight in the eye. But first, I'd like to know how much money we're talking about. Pearl and Gordon looked at each other, and he nodded, as if giving her permission. We've worked out a budget. Pearl pulled a piece of paper out of her purse and handed it to me. It's very modest, believe me. I took the sheet and ran my eyes over the numbers. It took me a few seconds to realize the total at the bottom of the page. It was astronomical. You could buy a small house in the suburbs of Janesville for that kind of money. Is this a joke? I asked, not hiding my surprise. Dad, Pearl sounded annoyed, that's the standard budget for a decent wedding these days. We've even cut costs where we can. I glanced at the items. A designer dress from a famous fashion designer, exotic flowers that would be shipped from another country, champagne that would cost as much as a teacher's monthly salary, a photographer to be flown in from New York. Pearl, I put the sheet on the table, this is not a modest budget. This is a budget for someone who wants to impress and show their status. It's not a wedding, it's a demonstration, Gordon snorted. With respect, Mr. Barlow, but times have changed. Nowadays, a wedding is an event to be celebrated with dignity. Dignified, yes, I agreed. But this, I pointed to the paper, is excessive. I knew it. Pearl leaned back in her chair, arms crossed over her chest. You've always been like that. Always counting every dime, always living below your means, and always judging me for wanting more. I'm not judging you for wanting more, I countered. I just don't understand why you would spend that kind of money on one day. Because this day is important to me. Pearl's voice became hysterical. Because I want it to be perfect. Because I deserve it. I looked at my daughter, at her angry face, at her expensive jewelry, at her perfect manicure. And suddenly I realized I didn't recognize her. When did the little girl I taught to ride a bike turn into this woman obsessed with status and glitz? Okay, I said, suddenly to myself. I'll help you with the wedding. Pearl's face brightened and Gordon visibly relaxed. But, I raised my hand, not as much as you're planning. I'm willing to give you a reasonable amount, say. A quarter of what's listed here. The rest you'll have to find on your own or cut your expenses. The smile disappeared from Pearl's face. Are you joking? A quarter? We can't even rent a venue with that money. Then pick a cheaper venue, I suggested. Or reduce the number of guests. Or get a local photographer instead of a New York photographer. You just don't understand, Pearl shook her head. You don't realize how important this is. Maybe, I agreed. But that's my suggestion. Gordon, who had been silent until then, suddenly leaned toward me. Listen, Mr. Barlow, I understand your position, but think of Pearl. This is her day, her dream, and you, as a father, should do everything you can to make that dream come true, especially since you're in a position to do so. How do you know about my opportunities? I asked, feeling the anger building inside me. Pearl told me about your investments, about your house, about how you're pretty wealthy. He smiled, the condescending smile I'd imagined. And, I thought, you're not getting any younger, Mr. Barlow. What are you going to do with all that money? Hadn't you better make your daughter happy now, while you can see her happy? I looked at this self-righteous man and could not believe his insolence. He spoke of my money as if it were his own and alluded to my imminent death as casually as if he were discussing the weather. You know, Gordon, I smiled as coldly as he did, you're right about one thing. I'm not getting any younger, and as I get older, I'm losing patience for this kind of talk. I got up from the table. Father, Pearl got up too. You can't just leave. We haven't discussed the details yet. What details? I looked at her with genuine bewilderment. You invited me to tell me how much I should pay for your wedding, I replied. That's the end of the conversation. Please, let's talk calmly. Pearl took my hand. I realize the amount seems like a lot, but it's really important to me. And for our family. Our family? I didn't hide the irony. Pearl, we don't have a family. We have you and me, and we barely speak to each other. And now you want me to pay a fortune for a party for people I don't even know. It's important for my reputation, she insisted. For my career. You know how the real estate business works. Connections make all the difference. And this wedding, it's a marketing ploy, I finished for her. Not a wedding, but a show of status to attract richer clients. Am I right? Pearl didn't answer, and that was more eloquent than anything I could say. Look, Mr. Barlow, Gordon interjected again, let's not be dramatic. Of course Pearl wants a beautiful wedding, like any woman, and if it helps her career, what's wrong with that? Don't you want your daughter to be successful? Success, I turned to him, is not just money and status, young man. It's also about self-respect and honesty and living within your means. Those are outdated views, Gordon shook his head. In today's world, success is measured by... I know what you mean by success, I interrupted him. And I don't need a lecture from a man who's known me for less than an hour and is already discussing how to spend my money after I'm dead. Gordon blushed, and Pearl threw him a warning glance. Father, please sit down, she asked more gently. Let's discuss this like adults. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to just walk away, but the other part of me, the part that still remembered Pearl as a child, couldn't do that. Okay, I sat back down at the table. Let's talk about it. But first, I want to hear an honest answer. Why did you think I should pay for your entire wedding? You both work. You make good money. Why not pay your own way? Pearl and Gordon looked at each other again. We're investing in real estate, Gordon finally answered. All of our spare cash goes into investments. It's a sound strategy in the long run. I see, I nodded. And that's why you thought it would be better to spend my money than your own? That's not how we see it, Pearl objected. You're my father, and traditionally, the father of the bride pays for the wedding. It's just tradition. Tradition came about when fathers married off their daughters at 18, I pointed out. You're a grown woman, Pearl, and if you want a wedding for that kind of money, you ought to be ready to pay for it yourself. But you have the money, she exclaimed. You've got a house worth a fortune. You've got investments. And what do you do with it? You sit alone in a huge house and what? You wait to die? Her words hurt more than she could have imagined, but I didn't let the pain show on my face. What I do with my money, Pearl, is my business. And yes, I will help you with the wedding, but on my terms, not yours. What terms? She asked suspiciously. I'll pay a quarter of the money, as I said. And I want to see all the bills. No transfers to the general fund or anything like that. I'll pay directly to the suppliers." Gordon frowned, clearly unhappy with this turn of events. "That's not very convenient, Mr. Barlow. We have our own wedding fund, and it would be easier. These are my terms," I was adamant. It was either that or nothing. Pearl looked annoyed, but then her face changed and she smiled. The same smile she used as a child when she wanted something from me. "All right, Father, we agree to your terms. A quarter of the sum is also a substantial help." Something in her quick agreement alarmed me, but I didn't pursue the subject. "Good," I nodded. "Send me a detailed cost plan with the contacts of the suppliers. I'll contact them directly." "Of course," Pearl smiled even wider. "And thank you, Father. I knew I could count on you." We ordered dinner, and the conversation turned to more neutral topics. Gordon talked about his work, about his clients. He didn't name names, but he made it clear that some of them were very powerful, about his plans for the future. Pearl would nod and look at him with an admiration that seemed exaggerated to me. I ate and listened, sometimes nodding, but inwardly feeling like a stranger at this celebration of life. They talked about things I didn't understand and didn't want to understand: status shopping, private clubs, social media promotion strategies. Their world was alien to me, just as my world was alien to theirs. As dinner drew to a close, I asked for the bill. "I invited you," Gordon objected, but without much enthusiasm. "No, I insist." I handed the waiter my credit card. "Consider it my wedding present." Gordon grinned, and I realized he appreciated the irony. The dinner bill was paltry compared to the amount they were hoping to get from me. We walked out of the restaurant together. The evening was cool, and Pearl was shivering in her light dress. "Can I give you a ride?" I offered. "No, thanks. We have a car," she said, pointing to a brand-new BMW parked nearby. "We live on the other side." "Okay," I nodded. "I'll see you then." "I'll call you the other day to discuss the details," Pearl said, kissing me on the cheek goodbye. "And thanks again." I watched them get into the car and drive away, and I felt a strange emptiness inside. This was my daughter, my flesh and blood, but between us lay a gulf of misunderstanding that seemed impossible to bridge. On the way home, I reflected on our conversation. There was something about Pearl and Gordon's behavior that made me uneasy. They'd agreed to my terms too easily, too quickly turned the conversation to other topics. It was as if they had a backup plan I didn't know about. At home, I poured myself a whiskey and sat in a chair in my study. Elizabeth's picture looked up at me with her usual soft smile. "What would you do, Liz?" I asked, looking at her portrait. "You always were a better judge of character." Of course, there was no answer. But I knew Elizabeth had never approved of my generosity toward Pearl. "You're spoiling her, Oscar," she used to say. "Money is no substitute for your attention to her." I wondered. Maybe I really had been wrong all these years. Maybe by trying to buy my daughter's love, I was only alienating her from me. But it was too late to change now. Pearl had grown up the way she was, and my belated attempts at parenting would only make her angry. I finished my whiskey and went to bed, but I couldn't sleep for a long time. Thoughts of the upcoming wedding, of Pearl and Gordon's strange behavior, of the money I'd promised to pay. All these things were running through my mind, keeping me awake, and somewhere deep inside was a feeling that I was making a mistake, that my money wasn't going to get me or Pearl what we both really wanted, but I'd already made my promise, and it was too late to back out. The week after the meeting at the restaurant was a busy one. Pearl had sent me a list of wedding expenses that was impressive in its scope. I'd chosen a few items: rent for the Green Valley Country Club, catering services, and musicians, which totaled about a quarter of the total budget, as we'd agreed. "I looked at your list," I told Pearl over the phone, "and I've decided that I'll pay for the Green Valley rent, the catering, and the musicians. Just those items." Pearl sounded disappointed. I thought you'd pick something. Well, something more prominent, like my dress or the photographer. Pearl, the venue and the food are the foundation of any wedding. Without them, nothing happens at all. Okay. She wasn't happy, but she didn't argue. I'll give you the contacts for the Green Valley manager and the catering company. You need to sign a contract with them and make an advance payment as soon as possible. The same day I called the manager of Green Valley, negotiated the details, and transferred the first payment, a significant sum, which guaranteed the booking of the country club on the desired date. Then he contacted the catering company and also made a down payment. In the evening, Iona called. "Uncle Oscar, how did your meeting with Pearl go?" "About as well as I expected," I replied tiredly. "She wants a wedding of the century, and I have to pay for it." "And you agreed?" "Partially. I'll pay a quarter of the costs, the venue, the food, and the musicians. The rest is up to them." "I see," Iona said quietly. "You know, I got an invitation to a pre-wedding dinner. It's in 2 weeks at the Green Valley. Are you invited too?" "Not yet," I wondered. "But maybe an invitation will come." The invitation came 3 days later, a plain envelope delivered by regular mail. Inside was a printed card with the date, time, and location of the pre-wedding dinner. No personal note, nothing to indicate a special role for the father of the bride. I called Pearl to confirm my attendance. "Got an invitation to the pre-wedding dinner. Of course I'll be there." "Oh, great," she sounded distracted. "Just be aware that it's going to be a rather corporate event. A lot of the guests are my clients and Gordon's co-workers." "I'll behave myself, if that's what you're worried about," I said, not hiding the irony. "That's not what I meant," Pearl replied quickly. "I'm just warning you that there will be a lot of strangers. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." On the day of the pre-wedding dinner, I was especially prepared. I got out my best suit, ironed my shirt, picked up the tie Elizabeth had once given me. I wanted to look dignified so Pearl wouldn't be ashamed to introduce me to her important guests. The Green Valley Country Club was 20 miles from Janesville, in a picturesque valley surrounded by rolling hills. It was a luxurious place with a golf course, tennis courts, and a colonial-style main building. I arrived exactly at the appointed time and left my car in the parking lot where many expensive cars were already parked. Inside the clubhouse, I was met by a host who checked my invitation and escorted me to the banquet room. The room was decorated with exquisite simplicity: white tablecloths, silverware, crystal glasses, fresh flowers on every table. The guests, dressed in evening clothes, stood in groups, talking and sipping champagne. I spotted Jonah, who waved to me from across the hall. I headed toward her, feeling the appreciative stares of the guests. "Uncle Oscar," Iona hugged me. "I'm glad you came. How are you feeling?" "A little out of sorts," I admitted. "There are so many people here and I don't know anyone." We each took a glass of champagne and found a relatively quiet corner from which we could watch the action. Soon Pearl and Gordon appeared. They entered the room like a couple from a magazine cover, she in an elegant evening gown, he in an impeccable tuxedo. It was almost 40 minutes before Pearl noticed us and walked up, leading Gordon with her. "Father Jonah," she smiled, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. "I'm glad you could make it." "We wouldn't have missed an event like this," Iona replied as she hugged Pearl. "Father, I want you to meet some of our friends. It's important to me." The next hour turned into an endless series of introductions and small talk. Pearl introduced me to her clients and colleagues, Gordon's business partners, some important people in the local government. "And this is my father, Oscar Barlow," Pearl said each time, adding, "former college economics professor." The word "former" was a reminder that my active life was behind me, that I was now just an old man living out my days. When the host announced that dinner was served and the guests were seated, I found that I was not at the main table, where Pearl, Gordon, and his parents were seated, but at one of the far tables with Jonah and some of Gordon's distant relatives. I'm surprised they didn't put you next to Pearl, Iona said. You're her father. I guess there were more important people there. I tried to be light-hearted, but I felt a twinge of resentment inside. After dessert, the toasts began. Gordon stood up first, raised his glass, and gave a heartfelt speech about how happy he was to meet Pearl. Gordon's father spoke next, talking about family values and traditions. I was expecting to be asked to say a few words. After all, I am the father of the bride. But instead, it was Pearl herself who took the floor. I want to thank everyone who has come to share this special evening with us, she began, looking around the room. I'm especially grateful to Gordon's parents who have taken me in like their own daughter and supported us through everything. I also want to thank everyone who is helping us organize the wedding, Pearl continued. Thanks to you, our day will be exactly as we dreamed it would be. Elegant, stylish, and modern. At the last word, she gave me a brief glance and I felt a chill run down my spine. Speaking of modern, Pearl smiled, but there was something strained in her smile. I want to touch on a delicate subject. As you know, a wedding is not only a celebration for the newlyweds, but also a certain amount of stress, especially when one has to consider various factors. She looked in my direction again, and now several of the guests turned their heads to follow her gaze. My father, Pearl pointed at me, is an old-school man. He's used to certain ways of life, certain traditions, and sometimes it's hard for him to accept that the world has changed, that there are new standards, new expectations. There was silence in the hall. Everyone was looking at Pearl and me. Gordon and I have been thinking a lot about how to make our wedding perfect for everyone, Pearl continued. And we've come to the conclusion that some of the guests might be more comfortable not to attend the ceremony and banquet, but to share our joy in some other way. By now, everyone in the room was looking at me. I felt the color come to my face. Father, Pearl said, speaking directly to me, but still speaking into the microphone so that everyone could hear, I know you want the best for me. And I think the best thing you can do for me on this day is to let me spend it the way I want to spend it, without no factors that might spoil the atmosphere. What are you talking about, Pearl? I asked, standing up. What I'm saying, she took a deep breath, is that maybe you shouldn't come to the wedding. There were whispers in the hall. Some of the guests were clearly shocked, but some nodded as if agreeing with Pearl. I shouldn't come? I repeated, not believing my ears. You're asking me not to come to your wedding? Don't get me wrong, Gordon interjected, standing beside Pearl and putting his arm around her shoulders. We want this day to be perfect, and how shall I put it? Your appearance, your demeanor. They're not exactly in keeping with the format of the event. My look? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My demeanor? Dad, don't make a scene, Pearl said softly, but the microphone was still on, and her words echoed throughout the room. You can see for yourself that you don't fit in with this company. You're old-fashioned. You don't know how to socialize with people of my circle. You're just going to feel awkward. And you'll ruin the party by looking like that, Gordon finished for her with a fake, sympathetic smile. I stood stunned by those words, unable to believe that my own daughter could say such a thing. Iona beside me jumped to her feet. Pearl, what are you talking about? She exclaimed. He's your father. How can you— It's none of your business, Lona, Pearl cut her off. This is between me and my father. No, Pearl, I finally found my voice. It's not between us anymore. You decided to take it public to humiliate me in front of all these people. I didn't mean to humiliate you. Pearl's voice had a whiny edge to it. I just wanted you to understand. I get it, I interrupted her. I realize that it's more important to you to impress these people than to show basic respect for the father who raised you. You know, Pearl, I turned to my daughter, you're right. I really won't fit in at your wedding, because I can't be a part of something so fake, so devoid of true values. I put my napkin down on the table and headed for the exit. As I passed the main table, I paused for a moment and added, looking Pearl straight in the eye, "Your mother would be disappointed, not with my manners or my looks, but with what you've become." With those words, I left the hall. Behind me, I heard the sound of voices, someone calling my name, but I didn't stop. I walked quickly to my car, feeling a storm of emotions building up inside: hurt, anger, frustration. At home, I went straight to the study and got a whiskey. I poured a glass, drank it in one gulp, poured another. I sat in the dark looking at Elizabeth's picture, thinking about how everything had gone wrong. The phone rang. It was Jonah. "Uncle Oscar? Are you all right?" "As much as I can be in a situation like this," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I left right after you. I couldn't stay there. What Pearl did, it's unforgivable." "Thank you, Jonah." I felt a surge of gratitude toward my niece. "But you shouldn't have left because of me." "Do you want me to come over?" "No, I don't want you to. I need to be alone and, think." After my conversation with Jonah, I sat still for a long time, staring into the darkness. Gradually, the pain and shock were replaced by a cold rage. I remembered all the times Pearl had used me, manipulated me, taken me without giving me anything in return. And tonight was the last straw. I turned on my computer and logged into my bank account. I found the payments I'd made for Pearl's wedding, the prepayment for the Green Valley rental, for the catering services. I clicked the Cancel Transaction button. The system asked if I was sure. I was more sure than I'd ever been in my life. Then I opened a desk drawer and pulled out a folder of documents. Among them was the contract for the car I'd bought for Pearl 3 years ago, a brand new Audi that was legally registered to me but actually used by her. I'd always paid the insurance and taxes. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer's number. Alan. "I'm sorry to call you so late. I have an emergency. I need to sell a car that's registered to me but used by my daughter. How quickly can I do that?" Alan, who had been friends with me since college, didn't ask too many questions. "Legally, the car is yours, so you can sell it at any time. Is there a specific buyer, or put it on the market?" "Put it on the market, for the best price you can get." "Okay, but Oscar, maybe we should talk to Pearl first. I mean, she's using the car." "Not anymore," I said firmly. "Make the sale, Alan, as soon as possible." When I finished talking, I felt strangely relieved. For the first time in a long time, I was acting decisively, not thinking about how Pearl would take it, not trying to please her or win her approval. I was just doing what I thought was right. The morning after the pre-wedding dinner began with a phone call. It was the manager of the Green Valley. "Mr. Barlow, we've had a problem with your payment. The bank says the transaction was canceled." "Yes, I canceled the payment," I confirmed, "and I don't plan on resuming it." But we have a contract." The manager was confused. "Miss Barlow will be very upset." "It's not my problem anymore," I said calmly. "If you have any legal questions, you can contact my lawyer." Before I could finish talking, the phone rang again. This time, it was Pearl. I took a deep breath and answered it. "What did you do?" she shouted, not even letting me say hello. "Green Valley just called. They say you canceled the payment. Do you realize that now we might lose the wedding venue?" "After last night, I thought you'd be glad I had nothing to do with your wedding," I replied coldly. "After all, I am so out of place in your social circle, so spoiling the view with my old-fashioned manners." "You don't understand." Her voice sounded desperate. "That's not what I meant. I just wanted you not to feel awkward around all these people." "Don't lie, Pearl," I was adamant. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You've made it clear that you're ashamed of me, that I'm a burden to you, not your father." "That's not true." She was almost crying. I just wasn't thinking. Please, let's talk. I'll come to you right now." "No," I cut her off. "Nothing will change by talking. My decision is final. I will not finance your wedding, not a dime." "But we have an agreement." Pearl went from pleading to threatening. "You can't just back out." We can sue you. Go ahead, I grinned. And you can tell the judge how you asked me not to come to the wedding so you wouldn't spoil the festivities. Pearl was silent for a moment, clearly not expecting that answer. And by the way, I added, call the catering company. I canceled that payment too. You can't do that. There was panic in her voice now. You promised. You gave your word. And you're my daughter, I said quietly. You were supposed to treat me with respect, not as an inconvenient relative you're ashamed to show your rich friends. I hung up without waiting for her response. The phone immediately rang again, but I didn't bother to answer it. Then it rang again and again. I turned off the sound and went into the kitchen to make coffee. While I was having breakfast, the doorbell rang. I went to the window and saw Pearl's car in the driveway. The same Audi I'd bought her 3 years ago. Gordon's SUV was parked next to it. The two of them had pulled in together. I opened the door and greeted them with a nonchalant look. Father, Pearl looked distraught, her eyes red with tears. Please listen to me. What happened yesterday, it was awful. I shouldn't have said those things. I apologize. Mr. Barlow, Gordon stepped forward, extending his hand for a handshake. I want to apologize too. We were both wrong. I ignored his hand and looked at Pearl. You're apologizing not because you realized how cruel you were, but because I canceled the payments for the wedding, I said bluntly. If I'd kept paying, you'd think everything was fine. It isn't, Pearl objected, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I'm really sorry, I was just confused. All these people, all these expectations. Pearl, I shook my head. You're a grown woman. You made your choice. Now live with the consequences. I'm not paying for your wedding anymore, and that decision is final. But Father, one more thing, I interrupted her. I'm selling your car. What? Pearl stared at me in shock. My car? Why? Because it's mine, I answered calmly. Legally, it's always been in my name. I bought it, I paid the insurance and the taxes. Now I've decided to sell it. You can't do that! Pearl went into a screaming match. It's my car! You gave it to me! No, I shook my head. I gave you permission to use it. That's different. Mr. Barlow, Gordon interjected, his tone hardening. I realize you're upset, but this is getting out of hand. If you sell Pearl's car, we'll be forced to go to court. Are you a lawyer, Mr. Pitt? I asked ironically. No, but then don't threaten me with a lawsuit, I smiled. Any lawyer will tell you that I have every right to dispose of my property. The car is registered to me, and I can do what I want with it. Pearl looked confused, like she couldn't believe I was really doing this. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. To punish me? No, Pearl, I sighed. Not to punish you. To make you realize that you can't treat people like ATMs and then expect them to love and support you. Relationships are about reciprocity, respect, caring, all things I haven't seen from you in years. That's not fair, Pearl exclaimed. I've always been a good daughter. I've called. I've visited you. When you needed something, I finished for her. When you needed money for a new apartment, for a vacation, for a car. And when I asked you just to spend time with me. Do you remember how many times you said no, saying you were busy? Pearl lowered her eyes, unable to answer. Look, Gordon intervened again, his voice more conciliatory. Let's discuss this calmly. We can find a compromise. Maybe you'll agree to pay at least some of the expenses, and maybe you could hold off on selling the car, at least until after the wedding. I looked at him with interest. This man had just publicly humiliated me, and now he was trying to bargain as if we were in a bazaar. No, I shook my head. No compromise. I've already contacted the dealership. They'll pick up the car tomorrow. And as for the wedding, that's entirely your responsibility. You both work, you make good money, you can handle it. But we've already planned it, Pearl sounded desperate. We've sent the invitations, we've booked all the favors. Without your help, we'll have to cancel the wedding or postpone it. It's your choice, I shrugged. You can do something more modest. or you can put it off until you've saved up enough money." "You're a cruel man," Pearl whispered, looking at me with a mixture of anger and pain. Mom would never do that. It was a low blow, and Pearl knew it. I felt something inside me clench, but I kept my composure. "Your mother would never humiliate a man in front of 200 guests," I said quietly, "especially a man who had loved and cared for her all her life. So don't tell me what Elizabeth would have done." Pearl pulled back as if I'd slapped her. Gordon put his hand on her shoulder. "Let's go, Pearl," he said. "We're not going to get anywhere here." They turned to leave, but Pearl stopped at the threshold and looked at me. "You'll regret this," she said. "When you're all alone, when you realize you lost your only daughter because of your pride and stubbornness, you'll regret it." "Maybe," I nodded, "but now I know I'm doing the right thing." I closed the door and leaned back against it, feeling suddenly tired. Despite the firmness I displayed in front of Pearl and Gordon, a hurricane of emotion raged inside me. This was my daughter, my flesh and blood, and breaking up with her, even a well-deserved one, hurt. But I couldn't let her continue to treat me like a convenient funding source to be used and then discarded when it became inconvenient. I deserved better than that. And oddly enough, I believe Pearl deserved better too. She deserved a chance to be a more honest and decent person, even if that lesson would be painful. Throughout the day, Pearl called several more times, but I didn't answer. Instead, I called my attorney Alan and asked him to come to my house. "I have another favor to ask of you besides selling the car," I said as we sat in my office. "I want to change my will." Alan looked at me carefully. "It's a big decision, Oscar. Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I nodded. "I want to remove Pearl from the will completely." "Completely?" Alan raised his eyebrows. "Not leave her even a token amount?" "No," I shook my head. "I decided to handle my funds differently." I told Alan my plan. I wanted to donate most of the money to the local college where I'd taught for more than 30 years to establish the Elizabeth Barlow Scholarship Fund for students of English literature. I decided to give part of the funds to Iona to help her start her own business. The remainder was to go to charity, the local hospice where Elizabeth spent her last days, and the animal shelter she had supported during her lifetime. "Those are worthy causes," Alan agreed. "But do you realize that Pearl could contest the will after you're dead?" "Let her try," I grinned. "We'll make it legally perfect, and I'll record a video message explaining my motives. Let the judge see that I was of sound mind when I made this decision." Alan nodded and started taking notes. When we finished discussing the details, he looked at me with concern. "Oscar, I've known you for almost 40 years, and I've never seen you so determined. What happened between you and Pearl?" I told him about the pre-wedding dinner, about the public humiliation, about Pearl and Gordon's words. Alan listened with growing surprise and indignation. "It's unbelievable," he said when I had finished. "I've known Pearl since she was a kid, and I never thought she'd be capable of something like this." "People change," I sighed. "Sometimes, not for the better." "And yet," Alan paused, "are you sure you want to cut off your relationship with your daughter completely? Maybe in time." "I'm not saying it's forever," I interrupted him. "If Pearl ever truly realizes what she's done and truly changes, I'd be happy to restore the relationship. But I don't believe that will happen anytime soon. In the meantime, I want to protect myself and my assets from her manipulations." Alan nodded understandingly and promised to prepare all the necessary documents in the next few days. After he left, I called Iona and invited her to lunch the next day. I needed to discuss with her my decision to help her start her business, and I wanted to do it in person, not over the phone. In the evening, while going through my mail, I discovered an email from Pearl. The subject line read, "One last try." I opened it with some hesitation. "Father, I am writing because you are not answering your phone. I hope you will at least read this letter. I realize I said some terrible things yesterday. I'm not proud of it. But you have to understand, I was under tremendous pressure. Gordon's parents are very conservative and have certain expectations. My clients and partners do too. My future, my career, depends on this wedding. Yes, that was an unfortunate thing to say. Yes, I shouldn't have said that in public. But are you really willing to destroy our family over one mistake? Can't you forgive your only daughter? Please come to your senses. Without your help, we'll have to cancel the wedding or make it so modest that it will damage my reputation. Do you really want that for me? Pearl. I reread the letter several times, not believing my eyes. Even now, trying to apologize, Pearl was only thinking about herself, her reputation, her career. Not a word about my feelings, about how painful it was for me to hear her words, how humiliating it was to stand in front of all those people and listen to my own daughter shame me. I closed the letter without responding. Some things can't be fixed with words, especially such empty and selfish ones. The next day, the dealer came to pick up Pearl's car. I handed him the keys and paperwork and signed all the necessary papers. It was strange to watch the car I had bought with such joy, thinking I was doing my daughter a favor, drive out of my driveway. But I felt no regret, only quiet determination. Jonah arrived by lunchtime, as we'd agreed. She looked worried. "Uncle Oscar, I heard what happened to Pearl's car," she said, hugging me. "She's telling everybody that you're taking revenge on her." "Let her say what she wants," I shrugged. "I know the truth, and you know the truth." We sat down at the table, and over lunch I told Jonah about my decision to help her start a business. "You've been talking about an organic home improvement store for a long time," I reminded her. "I'm ready to provide startup capital, not as a loan, but as an investment. If it works, great. If it doesn't, no big deal." Iona looked at me with surprise and gratitude. "Uncle Oscar, this is incredibly generous, but I can't accept such a gift, especially now that you're having a conflict with Pearl. She'll think you're doing it to spite her." "Let her think what she wants," I said again. "I'm doing this because I believe in you and your idea, because I know you don't just take, you give, and because, unlike some, you've never been ashamed of me or my old-fashioned views." Iona smiled, but there were tears glistening in her eyes. "I was never ashamed of you, Uncle Oscar. You've always been an example to me. After Daddy died, you became a second father to me. We discussed the details, the amount of money I was willing to give, the business plan she had already started to draw up, possible locations for the store." Iona was full of enthusiasm and ideas, and I felt I had made the right decision. It's better to help someone who appreciates that help and will do something useful than to keep spending money pointlessly on someone who only sees you as a source of funding. After lunch, Jonah and I took a walk around the garden. The day was clear and the first fall leaves were golden in the sun. "Do you think you and Pearl will ever get back together?" Jonah asked as we sat down on a bench near the old apple tree Elizabeth had planted. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "It's hard for me to see how that's possible now. She hurt me, Jonah, very deeply, and even now she doesn't realize what she did wrong." "Give her time," Iona put her hand on mine. "Maybe when things settle down, she'll understand." "Maybe," I nodded, though I didn't really believe it. "But I won't wait forever. Life's too short to waste it on people who don't appreciate you." After Jonah left, I called the college and made an appointment with the dean. I wanted to personally discuss the details of the scholarship fund I was planning to establish. Elizabeth had worked there all her life, teaching students the finer points of English literature, and I knew she would have loved the idea of helping young people get an education even after her death. In the evening, another call rang out. It was Gordon. I was hardly surprised. After Pearl had failed to get her way, she had obviously sent her fiancé to negotiate. "Mr. Barlow," his voice sounded unexpectedly conciliatory. "I'm calling to apologize again for what happened at the pre-wedding dinner. It was unforgivable." "Thank you for apologizing, Gordon," I replied with restraint, "but it doesn't change anything." "I understand," he sighed. "Still, I was hoping we could find some kind of solution. Pearl is very upset. She really regrets what she said. She regrets the consequences, not the words themselves, I pointed out. There's a difference. Perhaps you're right, Gordon agreed abruptly. But shouldn't we give her a chance to make amends? Can't you try to repair the relationship? We can, I nodded, though he couldn't see it. When she's ready to admit her mistake for real, not because she wants my money. When she realizes that her relationship with her father is more important than the impression she makes on her wealthy acquaintances. I understand, Gordon repeated, and I'll try to help her realize that. But maybe you could take the first step. Maybe you could agree to meet her, to talk to her. Not now, I shook my head. The wounds are too fresh right now. Maybe after a while. But definitely not before the wedding. Gordon was silent for a moment, apparently pondering my words. Well, I understand your position, he said at last. And I respect it, though I don't agree with it. I hope that in time the situation will change. I hope so too, I replied sincerely. Good luck with Pearl. After that conversation, I felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe Gordon isn't as bad as I thought. Maybe he really does love Pearl and wants the best for her. And maybe someday he'd help her realize what she'd lost by rejecting her own father for status and external glitz. But that was a thing for the future. For now, I had to focus on the present, on my plans to help Jonah with her business, on setting up a scholarship fund in Elizabeth's name, on my own life that went on despite the pain of loss. I sat down at my computer and began making a list of everything that needed to be done in the coming days. Rewrite the will, do the paperwork for the scholarship fund, meet with a financial advisor to discuss investments for Jonah. The list was getting long, but instead of fatigue, I felt energized and determined. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just existing, responding to the requests and demands of others, but acting according to my own desires and principles. Before going to bed, I took a long look at the picture of Elizabeth standing by my bed. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, Liz, I whispered, but I'm doing what I think is right. I hope you would understand. And I thought Elizabeth smiled a little warmer than usual from the picture, as if giving her tacit approval. Spring in Janesville was always special. The air was filled with the scent of blossoming apple trees and lilacs, and the town seemed to be waking up after a long winter's hibernation. It had been 6 months since that unfortunate pre-wedding dinner that had changed my life. 6 months since I had made a decision that many would consider radical, but which was the beginning of an unexpected liberation for me. I was standing in the garden, pruning the overgrown bushes that had grown over the winter when the phone rang. It was Lona. "Uncle Oscar!" Her voice sounded excited. "I did it. The bank has approved an additional loan for the store." "Congratulations." I was genuinely happy. "I had no doubt that you would succeed. Without your help, nothing would have happened." She sounded grateful. "Your investment gave me a start, and your advice helped me make a business plan that convinced the bank." In the last 6 months, the eco-friendly home goods store that Iona had dreamed of for years had become a reality. A small but cozy space in downtown Janesville, a thoughtful assortment, attention to detail, all this attracted customers, and the business gradually gained momentum. "You did it all yourself," I countered. "I just helped a little in the beginning." "It wasn't a little help," Iona laughed. "Anyway, I want to celebrate. How about dinner at my place tonight? I'll make your favorite risotto with mushrooms." "I'd love to," I agreed. "Would 7 o'clock be okay?" After my talk with Jonah, I went back to work in the garden thinking about the changes that had taken place in my life in the past 6 months. Pearl and Gordon's wedding was still on, though not as big as they'd planned. They'd moved it from December to February, changed the venue to a more modest one, and reduced the guest list. I knew this not from Pearl. She hadn't tried to contact me since our last conversation, but from Jonah, who still went to the ceremony, believing that family ties, no matter what, were important. "She asked about you," Iona told me after the wedding. She asked how you were, if you were well. And what did you say? I asked without much enthusiasm. She said you looked great and seemed 10 years younger, Iona smiled. You should have seen her face. She was obviously expecting to hear that you were lonely and remorseful. I wasn't remorseful. What's more, the decision to sever a toxic relationship with my daughter, oddly enough, brought me release. I stopped feeling guilty for not living up to her expectations, stopped trying to earn her approval with financial support, stopped hoping that one day she would see me not just as a wallet but as a person with feelings and dignity. Instead, I began to live for myself, and it turned out that at 66, life can be filled with new discoveries and encounters. It all started by accident. In January, as I was doing paperwork for the Elizabeth Scholarship Fund at the college, I ran into Margaret Reed, a new art history professor. We got to talking, and she invited me to a show of local artists she was curating. I accepted without much enthusiasm, more out of politeness than interest. But the exhibition turned out to be unexpectedly interesting, and Margaret turned out to be a pleasant interlocutor, knowledgeable and enthusiastic about her work. After the exhibition, we continued to socialize. Margaret, a widow like me, had recently moved to Janesville from Seattle and knew almost no one here. I showed her around the city, told her about its history, and introduced her to the local culture. She, in turn, exposed me to the art world, of which I had previously had only a superficial understanding. We didn't become a couple in the romantic sense. Both of us valued the memory of our spouses too much for that. But we became friends, and this friendship enriched my life with new colors and impressions. Through Margaret, I became acquainted with a group of senior citizens who organized the Second Youth Club. They arranged excursions, attended concerts, exhibitions, theaters, held literary evenings and culinary masterclasses. At first I was skeptical about the idea of joining them. It seemed to me that such clubs were for lonely old people who had nowhere to go. But gradually I realized that this was not the case. These people were not just passing the time. They were living a full life, continuing to develop, learning new things, enjoying every day. And I decided to follow their example. I enrolled in photography courses, which I had long dreamed of but kept putting off. I started going to the swimming pool 3 times a week. I joined a group of volunteers who read books at a children's hospital. And gradually, I found that my days were filled with meaning and joy, and the loneliness that had plagued me after Elizabeth's death receded. When I finished my work in the garden, I went into the house, took a shower, and began to get ready for Jonah. On the way, I stopped at a candy store and bought her favorite blueberry cheesecake. Iona's apartment was above her store, small but cozy, with big windows and a terrace where she grew herbs and flowers. When I arrived, the table was already set and the mouth-watering aroma of risotto was coming from the kitchen. "Uncle Oscar!" Iona hugged me and took the cheesecake. "You're on time, as always. I just finished cooking." We sat down at the table, and over dinner, Iona talked about her plans to expand the business. She wanted to add organic cosmetics and pet products to the range. People are becoming more and more concerned about what they use at home, what they put on their skin, what they feed their pets, she explained enthusiastically. And I want to offer them quality alternatives to mass-market products. As I listened, I was filled with pride for my niece. She had found her vocation, a business that brought her not only income but also satisfaction, and I was glad I could help her do it. "What about your personal news?" Iona asked as we moved on to dessert. "How are things going with Margaret?" "We're just friends, Iona," I smiled, "and I value that friendship." I know, she winked. "But you two look so good together, and she clearly has a thing for you." "I'm good with what I have," I shook my head. "Not every relationship has to turn romantic." After dinner, we went out on the terrace. The evening was warm and the air smelled of spring. The lights of Janesville could be seen in the distance, twinkling in the fading twilight. "Have you seen Pearl?" Iona asked, breaking the silence. "No," I shook my head. "I don't plan to." "She asked about you last week," Iona said cautiously. "We ran into each other at the supermarket. She looked not very well." "What do you mean, not very well?" Despite everything, I couldn't help but worry about my daughter. "Tired," Iona shrugged. "Said she and Gordon were going through a rough patch. Something to do with his work. Didn't go into details." I sighed. Part of me wanted to know more, wanted to call Pearl, ask if she was okay. But the other part reminded me of the pain she'd caused, the words that couldn't be forgotten or forgiven so easily. "She made her choice," I said finally, "and I made mine. Maybe someday we'd find our way back to each other. But right now, it's too soon." Iona nodded, not insisting. She respected my decision, though I knew that deep down she was hoping for a reconciliation. We talked about other things. The book I'd recently read, the trip to the mountains Iona had planned for the next month, the new photos I'd taken on a field trip with the second youth club. By the time I got home, it was late. I sat in a chair in my office and looked at Elizabeth's picture. "You'd be proud of Jonah," I said aloud. "She is so much like you, the same determination, the same kindness, the same independence." I often talked to Elizabeth, telling her about my days, sharing my thoughts and feelings. It wasn't a sign of insanity, just a way to stay connected to the woman who had been a part of my life for so long that even death couldn't completely sever that bond. The next morning, Richard Davenport, my old friend and college colleague, called. We had met in graduate school, taught together, and kept in touch even after he had moved to Portland to take a position as dean of the economics department at the university there. "Oscar," his voice was as cheerful as ever. "How's life in this backwater of ours?" "Not too bad," I smiled. Richard had always called Janesville a backwater, even though he'd lived here most of his life. "How's Portland?" "Rainy as usual," he laughed. "But that's beside the point. I have a proposition for you, Oscar, or rather, an invitation." "I'm listening." I raised my eyebrows, intrigued, though he couldn't see it. "Remember we talked about the book on behavioral economics? About how to apply its principles to real life, to the everyday decisions of ordinary people?" I remember we had discussed the idea a few years ago while Elizabeth was still alive, but it was just talk then. "Anyway, a publishing house is interested. They're willing to give an advance and a contract if we submit a detailed outline and a couple of sample chapters." "That's unexpected," I was surprised. "But I'm not sure I'm ready for such a project, Richard. It's been years since I've taught. I don't keep up with new research." "That's why you're perfect for it," Richard interrupted me. "We're not writing an academic treatise, Oscar. We're writing a book for ordinary people to help them make better decisions. Your experience, your outside perspective is exactly what we need." I thought about it. The idea was intriguing, but, "Richard, I can't move to Portland. I have a home here. I have connections." "Who said anything about moving?" He laughed again. "Although I admit I was hoping you'd at least consider it. Portland's a great city, Oscar. There's so much going on here, so many opportunities. And frankly, I miss our discussions over a glass of whiskey." I smiled. I missed those discussions too. Richard had always been a great conversationalist, a sharp mind, a broad outlook, the ability to listen and argue without getting personal. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "About the book for sure. Maybe about moving too, but no promises." "That's all I'm asking." I could hear the satisfaction in Richard's voice. "Let me know when you decide. And Oscar, it would be great to work together again." After talking to Richard, I couldn't stop thinking about his proposal. The book was an interesting project in itself, an opportunity to share knowledge, experience, and help people make sense of the complex world of economic decisions. But moving to Portland? That would mean leaving the house where Elizabeth and I lived, the city where most of our lives had been spent, the places that held her memory. On the other hand, there was less and less of what held me here. Pearl I didn't see and didn't plan to see. Iona, though she lived in Janesville, was independent and hardly needed my constant presence. The new friends from the second youth club were fine people, but we weren't that close. Margaret. She was nice to spend time with, but our relationship didn't go beyond friendship and was unlikely to ever do so. I decided not to make any hasty decisions and give myself time to think, especially since summer was ahead and I was planning a trip with the second youth club to the coast. The trip turned out to be exactly what I needed. 10 days on the ocean, in the company of people who knew how to appreciate every moment of life, taught me a lot. I looked out at the vast horizon, at the waves crashing on and off the sand, and thought about life, about its cycles, about how sometimes you have to let go of the past in order to move on. Back in Janesville, I made a decision. I called Richard and told him I agreed, both to the book and to move to Portland. Not permanently, but for a year at first to see how the book went, how I liked the new city. I decided not to sell the house in Janesville, but to rent it out just in case I wanted to come back. Iona accepted my decision with understanding, though with some sadness. "I'll miss you, Uncle Oscar," she said as she helped me pack the books. "But I'm glad you're not sitting still, that you're trying new things." "Portland isn't that far away," I comforted her. "You can always come visit, and I will. This isn't goodbye, Jonah, just a new chapter. I didn't tell Pearl of my decision. I didn't see the point. If she wanted to find me, Lona could always pass on my contacts. If not, well, so be it." I spent my last evening in Janesville in the garden. Sitting on a bench under an old apple tree Elizabeth had planted, I thought about the years that had passed, the decisions I had made, the roads I had traveled. Did I have any regrets? Of course. I regretted not building a warmer relationship with my daughter, for not seeing her true attitude toward me sooner, for trying to buy her love instead of demanding respect. But I didn't regret my last decision, to end the toxic relationship, stop being a funding source, and start living for myself. That decision brought me pain, but also liberation, and opened the door to new opportunities, new relationships, and a new life. In the end, self-respect and dignity proved more important to me than family ties based on material gain alone, and I was sure Elizabeth would understand and support me in this. In the morning, I walked through the house one last time, saying goodbye to every room, every corner that held memories of my life with Elizabeth. I took a few of the things dearest to my heart, her photographs, letters, books with her notes in the margins. I left the rest in the house, which would now be waiting for new tenants. Iona came to see me off. We hugged goodbye, and I promised to call every week to tell her about my new life, about working on my book, about Portland. "Be happy, Uncle Oscar," she said, looking into my eyes. "You deserve it." I got in my car and drove out of Janesville, the town that had been my home for almost 40 years. But instead of sadness, I felt a strange excitement, an anticipation of something new, uncharted. There was a road ahead, a new town, a new job, new people. I didn't know what this new chapter of life would bring me. I didn't know if I'd miss Janesville enough to want to come back. I didn't know if I'd ever reconcile with Pearl, or if our paths had parted forever. But I did know one thing. I never looked back again. I was looking forward to the future I'd chosen for myself. And that was the most important thing.